أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله الصلاة والسلام على رسول الله السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Welcome back. This is our 9th class and our second session on chapter 4. We started to discuss chapter 4 last Tuesday, and we're going to continue inshallah with some more concepts, and inshallah we'll finish chapter 4, and then at the end of the class I'm going to give you some time to ask me questions if you have any in regards to the computerized AIS and the flowchart exercises. So let's start. The next concept in data base is data dictionary. You know, a dictionary, when it has a language, in the language dictionary, you not only have meanings of words, but you have descriptions of words, and you have sentences where the words are used, and you know whether the word is a noun or a verb or whether it's both, etc. It gives you a complete idea of a particular word. It can be from one language to another, for example, from English to Arabic, or it could be in the same language. So you could have a data dictionary or a language dictionary from English to English, and it gives you a further explanation of the word that you're looking for. The data dictionary similarly has information about the elements in the database. For example, let's look at one example to understand the concept of data dictionary. You have an element which is called the customer number. So we want to know how is this data element used in the database, and the data dictionary gives us the idea, a full picture of how the customer number is used. So the first thing that you will find in the data dictionary about customer number is the description of the element. What is the element? It is the customer number. Then the data dictionary tells us the records this customer number is contained in. So it's contained in the accounts receivable record, in the sales analysis record, in the customer record. For example, if you look at an example from yourself, your student number, it is used in your grade report, it's used in the attendance report, etc. So in the records that your student number is used in also would be described in the data dictionary. The source of the data element, for example, the customer number comes from the number listing, right? Customer number listing. Your student ID number comes from the admissions office. When you're admitted into the university, when your admission is accepted, when you are accepted as a student, you're assigned a student ID number. So that's the source of your student ID number. Whenever a customer joins, there is a customer number listing, and that's where the customer number starts, right? Every customer is assigned a customer number. The length and the type of the data element. For example, here it says 10 and numeric, which means the customer number has 10 digits and it's numeric. It's all numbers. Now, you could have a data element that is all numbers. You could have one which is all alphabets, right? An alphabetic data element. Or you can have alphanumeric, meaning part of it is alphabetical, part of with alphabets, part of it is numeric. For example, your user ID, many of your user ID in the university, at the university, has some numbers as well as some letters. So it's alphanumeric. And this customer number in this data dictionary says the customer number has 10 digits, right? And it's all numbers, so there are no alphabets in here. Then it says programs used in, for example, accounts receivable updating program, customer file updating, credit analysis. Your student number is, for example, used in Blackboard, in MyQU, in the banner. So there are programs that the data element is used in, and the data dictionary tells us where it's used. the output location. For example, the customer status report, the credit report. So that's where the data element is found in that output. Now, uh, you could have, for example, an attendance or an absence report where any student who is 25% or more absent is put on that report. So your student ID number would be used there, or dean's list, for example. The It's another report. It will show all those students who have uh, above a particular certain GPA in a particular semester. So your student ID number again would be used in that report as well. The next is authorized users. It says no restrictions, meaning this is a data element that is not restricted by user. For example, your student ID number is the same way. I could ask any of you for your student ID number, and it's not a secret information. But I couldn't ask you for your password, for example. That's restricted. Only the user should know the password and nobody else. For example, your grade in another class, your instructor in that class knows, and no other instructor should know that unless there is a need. So, and it has to be authorized. So I cannot go and ask for your grade. It's not something that I can do. The other instructor has the right not to share it with me. So it's restricted. But I could ask anybody for their student ID number, or in this case, the customer number, and it's not restricted. It is available to everybody. And then alternative names. The data element could have alternative names. So for example, you could have student number or student ID. Same It means the same number. For example, we have at Qatar University an employee number, but that is also referred to as the job number, right? So when somebody is asking for the job number or the employee number, they mean the same thing. It's the same number, right? All right. So the alternative name, right, is uh, used for certain data elements. In this case, the customer the customer number says that it does not have an alternative name. We have a question here. It says attendance is programs used and attendance report in Blackboard is the output location. There are some overlaps here. So the program is uh, something that can also generate a report, right? So for example, there is a program that updates the accounts receivable, and there is an updated accounts receivable report. So the output from that program, right, is the report or the output, right? And the program is that which generates the report or generates the output, right? So it can be interchangeably used, right? So you could have a program that updates the customer status, and you could have an output that is the customer status report, right? Does it make sense? All right. Any other questions about the data dictionary before we go to the next item? Okay. Now, the next, we have three database management system languages: data definition language, data manipulation language, and data query language. These languages are used to define and manipulate and query the database, and they are written using computer programming languages. They are usually done by IT professionals under the guidance of the accountants or the business executives. The data definition language defines the database. So every element in the database, when you go to enter the element, the data definition language gives the perimeters, gives the limits and the criteria for each data. So for example, if you're entering phone number in a particular field, in a particular box, then you could define that field saying that it should have 8 digits. It cannot have all zeros. It cannot have any alphabets, right? So you have now defined that field. The computer programming language that allows you to do that is the data definition language, where you go and define each element. Most accountants do not know how to use this language. They give the descriptions of the data to the IT professionals and they define the database. I was involved in early on in my career to build a database called the data tracker, which we use to track all our customer data. And I remember sitting down with the IT professional and he asked me different questions about what do you want here, what do you want here, and how you want, how many digits, alphabets or numbers, who can update it, who can access it, etc., etc. So I gave him the information, but he went and he defined the data, right? So database management language, the data definition language is used to define how the data is going to be. You can stop and ask me questions if you need more clarification. The second is the data manipulation language, which is also a similar programming language that allows you to edit the data. So once the data is entered, to edit the data also requires some authorization or limited access. So not anybody can go and delete or change and edit the data. People can access the data only according to their job functions. So for example, I cannot access or edit the data in your auditing course, right? I don't have access. I cannot manipulate the data. And there are certain things that I cannot do even to the data that I can access. For example, I cannot drop you from my course, right? You have to drop yourself. I cannot go and say, okay, I don't like this student, I'm going to drop this student. This is not something that I have access to. So changing the data also requires some perimeters, some criteria, and the database manipulation language, the data manipulation language defines who can do what and who cannot do what, right? And what can they change and what they cannot change. All right. Also, it gives a warning if you're changing something that is normally not changed. So for example, if I go to a quiz grade that was automatically posted after you have taken the quiz and I accidentally go to change that, then it will ask me, do you really want to change this? Then I could say, no, I don't. Or if I did want to change that, for example, at the end of the semester, I'm going to drop your lowest quiz. So I'm going to make the lowest quiz 0, right? I'm going to make that null. I'm going to make that disappear. And the computer every time will ask me, do you want to make this 0? And I'm going to say yes, because I am giving 4 quizzes and the lowest one will be dropped, right? So the data manipulation language is written, the codes are written to allow the changing of the data. The third one is data query language, which is the language that defines how you can query the data. What are the perimeters? What are the criteria that you can use to query the database? So for example, if you go to your spring schedule, which will be available in a few days, inshallah, you can query the database. The database has all the courses in all the colleges, right? And you can access only those courses, or you can look at only those courses that you're interested in. So you can go and say, I want accounting. I want only Mondays and Wednesdays. I want the courses at 11 o'clock. Or I want the courses taught by Professor so-and-so. So you can query the database. The database language, the query language allows you to do that. Someone in the background wrote the programming language in such a way that you could go and you could access the data that you want, query the data, to question the database, only those items that you want to see. You can query the database using the data query options, and the data query language is the language that is used to write those options. Does this make sense? Most accountants will not use the language, but they will be a part of designing the database with the help of an IT professional. Okay? Any questions on this? Is it clear? The next is the report writer language, which another programming language that allows the writing of reports. So for example, if you go to the database and you want to look at the courses for spring, only accounting courses or only accounting courses on Mondays and Wednesdays, when you select that, the output will come out on your screen in a particular format. So the first column will have the accounting course number, for example, ACCT 431 or ACCT 333, and then the second column will say the course name, Accounting Information System, Cost Accounting. The third column will show the instructor's name. The next line will show the time, and then it will show the room number. All of these things are in a particular format. So you can change the format. If you say that I want to look at the timing first and the name of the course after that, this is not how you can look at it, because it's already defined using something called a report writer language, which somebody went into the background and they wrote the format of the report. I had a limited uh, experience with this again when I was working as an accountant about 20 years ago. um, I had the option one time to format the income statement. So I went into the background and I could change the title, or I could make it center, or I could make it bold, and I could go to the next line and I could change the format of the date and so forth. I could write that using the computer language. It is not as easy as formatting in Microsoft Word, let's say. So once I did that, then when I came into the front end to look at the report, it took a few trials, because you cannot just, there is no icon that says center. You have to space it out and you put it in the center, and when you go to the front end, it might not come out to the center. So you have to do a few trials before the report is the way you want it to come. So this report writer language allows the programmer to write the report the way the accountant or the business executive wants. So the users then go into the front end and they specify the elements they want to look at, and the report writer language searches the database. So for your case, they're searching the report writer language. The database is searching the accounting courses, and it extracts only the accounting courses and it prints it. Or when I say print, not necessarily on paper, it shows it on the screen in a specific format. That format is the format that was written by the report writer language. If you want, as a user, to change the format, if you say that I don't want the accounting course name to come first, I want the instructor's name on the left column, this is something you cannot do. The report writer already defined that, and it will come the way it was written by the report writer language. Does this make sense? Are you following? Yes, no, maybe, no response. Anybody out there? Okay. Atif says that is the DDL, is the format part of DDL. Rephrase your question one more time. I'm not sure I understand the question clearly. Atif's question is the creation of the format component of data definition language? No, the data definition language, for example, you have a field here, right? And in that field, I can define that the format of that field is going to be like this. So X equals numbers only, right? So this is defining the data, right? This is defining the data. The report is, I have a page. On that page, I have lines, and I say the first line should say this, the second line should say this, the first column should say this, the second column should have this information. So when you go to your unofficial transcript or you go to your grades, there is a particular format it uses, and it extracts the data from each one of the courses that you're taking, right? So the report writer writes that format of the report. The final output is in a particular format. The report writer shows that format. Sharat says, how will the knowledge of the languages be useful in our career? Like, do some accountants involved in using these languages? Yes, they do. The report writer language, the language that you have about the data definition and data manipulation and data query and report writer, this is just surface knowledge. You are just getting introduced that there is something like this. Some accountants who are perhaps MIS minors or they have interest in this, they could be involved in writing, but most accountants won't be. Most accountants will work with the IT professionals who will use these languages, and the knowledge of these languages will help you work with those IT professionals when they design the database for you, right? So you should have an idea about this, and that's all we are giving you is the idea in this course. You're not learning any data definition language or report writer language in this course. You're getting introduced to the concept that there is something like this. Does that make sense? Very good. Now, any other questions? Okay. The next concept we have is the data model and the relational data model. What does this mean? A data model is an abstract representation of the contents of the database, and it represents everything that is in the database. So let me just show you what I mean by that. All of you have seen the MyQU web page. All of you have gone into MyQU. For example, this MyQU portal that you see on the screen right here. All of you have logged into this, yes? You see these tabs on top, that my Talabati services, my academics, my services, all of these things. This MyQU campus portal gives you access to the database, which contains a lot of information that are stored in many different tables that are connected together. A data model shows the contents of the database in a summarized format. And look at that in MyQU. You go to MyQU, and there is a tab which will show you the entire database that you're accessing, and that is right here. So if you come here, you see all the data that you can access through MyQU is represented here. You see this, the first tab, MyQU, right? The second tab, Talabati services, and then you have column 1, column 2 that shows the different elements of the database, the whole database. Now, we do not generally, non-IT people do not go here. This is very difficult to navigate, right? But this shows the entire, this is the abstract or summarized representation of the entire database. This is the data model. We don't access it like this, but the experts can go and look at the entire database, meaning that you have access to all the data in the database that you have access to. Now, you may not have access to many of these things as a student. I may not have access to some of these things as an instructor, but the things that you have access to, all of this is represented here in the data model. So this is what a data model looks like. Okay, now let's go back to our slides. So if we do another diagram of the same thing, it shows the different elements of the database and how they are interconnected, how they are represented in an abstract format. That's the data model. Abstract, another word instead of abstract that can be used is summarized version, summarized format of the entire data. So this is the data model, right, where the data in the database are connected and structured together. Are you following? Okay. Now we come to the next concept, which is the concept of keys. Now, think of the database as many tables that are interconnected, where the database can access and extract, select data, particular data from these different tables and create more tables. For example, I have a table where I keep all of your grades. Your auditing teacher has a table where he keeps all of your grades. Your management teacher has a table where she keeps all of your grades. Your economics teacher, your Arabic language teacher, all of us have tables. Somehow the database can go and extract only your grade from my table, and only your grade from the auditing table, only your grade from the Arabic table, and create another table and show it to you. So somehow these tables are connected, and the way they are connected is through keys, right? Through keys. And there are certain rules that the keys must follow in order for the database to work. So let's try to understand them. The first one is the primary key. So this is a table. Let's say in that table you have the information for employees. So it's an employee information table. In there, you have a column for employee ID. You have a column for the first name, the last name, the office phone, home phone, position ID, etc. The employee ID is a primary key, and the quality of the primary key is, number one, it cannot be duplicated. Two employees cannot have the same employee ID. It must always be unique. Number two, if you enter the information of any employee, you cannot leave the employee ID blank. So it must be unique and it cannot be duplicated, right? So in your case, in my table, what is the primary key for you? In my table, what is the primary key? The student ID, right? The student ID. Student ID is the primary key. I don't have your Qatari ID in my table, right? The university may have it. I don't know what your Qatari ID is. I am only dealing with your student ID. Your student ID is unique. Can I have two students in my class whose first name and last name are the same? Is it possible? Can I have two students? Same first name, same last name? Of course. So therefore, the first name and the last name cannot be a primary key, right? So the primary key must be something that is unique, and it cannot be left blank. There is no student in the university who does not have an employee ID. There could be a student, for example, who does not have a mobile phone. It's I know you will think it's impossible, but it is not a requirement. So you can have, well, it was not a requirement. Now, with HTML and so forth, you must have not only a phone, but a smartphone. So, but before pre-corona, you could have a student coming to the university. I had students, or at least one student I can think of, who did not have a phone. So there could be a space left blank, but student ID cannot be left blank. There cannot be a student without a student ID. So the primary key must be present and it cannot be duplicated. So this is the rule for primary key. The second is foreign key. A foreign key is a primary key in another table. So, for example, here I can have another table where I have all the positions in the company listed one time. So I have, let's say, 10 positions. I have associate, senior associate, supervisor, senior supervisor, manager, senior manager, etc., etc. Every position has an ID, let's say. So we have, let's say, A24, A25, B24, P25, like there is a position ID. Similarly, we have an ID for every course that you're taking. Anybody know the course ID for our course? Anyone knows the course ID for our course? What is the course ID for the Accounting Information System course? Anyone? It's not AIS. It's 421. It's ACCT 421, right? It's ACCT 421. Very good. Now, this would be the, if this was the course ID, course table, then the course ID would be ACCT 421, right? Now, ACCT 421 can only appear, the whole thing, ACCT 421 is the course ID, not just 421, not just ACCT. You have to have both, right? So this is a group code. You have to both. You have to have ACCT and you also have to have 421, right? So that's the ID. Now, how many times can that come in the course table? If it was the primary key, how many times can I use ACCT 421? One time, right? In the course table, it will come only one time. So this is a primary key in the course table. But in the student table, can I have more than one student register for ACCT 421? Can I have more than one student in the student table register for the ACCT 421? Yes. So here, the student in the student table, the course ID is not a primary key. It is called a foreign key. The reason why it's called a foreign key is because it is a primary key in another table. So the rule is foreign keys are primary keys in another table, right? Is that clear? Foreign keys are primary keys in another table. They either must correspond to the other table or it can be left blank. So for example, you can have a student who did not register for any courses in a semester. It is possible. So all the course IDs would be left blank. But if you enter a course ID, it must match primary key in the course table. So this is the primary key. Now this is the connection between these two tables. And then the third one is non-key, which is just an attribute or a quality of the primary key. It is not a foreign key because it is not a primary key in another table. So for example, the office phone or the home phone, first name, last name, all of these are non-key attributes. The non-key must be an attribute or a quality of the primary key, right? So the foreign key is something that shows up as a primary key in another table, and the non-key is a quality of the primary key. It is not a primary key anywhere else. This is the end of the non-key right here, right? It does not go to any other table to connect this with another table. So to summarize what we have here, we have a few rules about the database keys. The first one is called entity integrity rule. The entity integrity rule is primary key must be unique and it cannot be null. And you know this already, we just talked about it. The primary key must be unique, it cannot be duplicated. Two users or two individuals or two records cannot have the same primary key, and it cannot be left blank. This rule is called entity integrity rule. The second one is referential integrity rule, which means foreign keys, which is foreign keys must be either null or correspond to a primary key in another table. So the foreign key, you can leave it blank. For example, if a student did not register for any course, you can leave that blank. But if you put a course ID, then it must be matching with a course ID in the course table. So it must match with the primary key in the course table, right? This is called the referential integrity rule. The third rule is every column must be single valued, meaning in the same column, I must enter the same information for all the users. If it's the phone number, home phone number, then I must enter the home phone number for everybody. I cannot enter home phone number for someone and mobile phone number for somebody else. If it is the email address, I must enter email addresses for everybody in that column. I cannot enter email address for someone and date of birth for somebody else. It must be the same value that I'm entering in the same column for every user. And the last one is non-key attributes must describe a quality of the primary key. So any quality of the primary name, date of birth, phone number, address, GPA, all qualities of the primary key, each quality of the primary key is called a non-key attribute, a non-key attribute. Any questions? Do you have an idea of what we're talking about? Do you get a sense of what this is? This involves? Yes, no, maybe. Okay. Now we have two more slides, and I'll give you some time to ask me questions about the computerized AIS as well as the flowchart exercises if you have any questions. The future of databases in accounting. The future is here. We already have powerful querying capabilities. We can query the database. We can look at the data. As a matter of fact, we have an overload of data. We have more data and more information that you can, more than what we can handle, right? So the database allows you, if you want to look at the data about any publicly traded company in the stock market, you could go to their website and you have access to their annual reports, hundreds of pages of data maybe for each company for each year. So you can look at data using the database that's made available to you, and you can look at the data the way you like. So you can have multiple views of the same information. You could, if you want to look at the data by month, by quarters, by year, you could look at the data in many different ways. Right? If you wanted to look at the data of a particular branch, or you want to look at only the sales data for 3 months, you can look at the data the way you want. You can view the data the way you want. Just like you can do in Blackboard. All the courses are there, but you can look at the data. You can view the data the way you like. And the database incorporates financial and operational data. So you have the about sales and operations and so forth, the financial data, and you have also the operational data. For example, when the delivery truck is going to come, or how much inventory is left, right? Or what models of phone you have in your storage. So you have the financial data and you also have the operational data. And you can see this when you go to an electronic goods store or an electronic section in the supermarket. If you ask them, do you have such and such model or you have such and such phone, they can look at the database of inventory and they can tell you whether they have that or not, right? So it's very powerful. You can if the data is stored correctly, then you can use that to run your operations well. And this is again the customized views as desired by users, the same concept. You can look at the data the way you want, and when you're writing the report or when you're creating the database query, you can give different options to the users to look at the data the way they like. You can give them as many or as few options as they need. So as accountants, we need some exposure, and what we are learning here is not deep knowledge about database. We are just getting introduced to the different concepts of the database and how the databases work, how they're connected and so forth. Just the surface, just a little bit of information. This is just one chapter in one course, right? And there are accountants who become experts later on, business executives who work with the database extensively, and you can learn. I remember one time I uh, learned a little bit more about Microsoft Access. You know, Microsoft Access is something that you can use to design databases, and this is back in 2000, if I remember correctly. I uh, was studying a book and training myself on how to build simple databases using Access. And I mean, there is a lot to learn there. There is no end to knowledge. You just need to decide what is going to be your cup of tea. You need to decide what is it that you're going to do well and you're going to enjoy, because there is no end. And if you end up doing something that you actually don't enjoy, then it becomes very difficult to do that 5 or 6 days a week, 8 or 10 hours a day. So you need to do something that you enjoy, and you will find that out when you go to work. You will find that out. Do you really like to be involved in databases, or do you like to be involved in something else? And you can learn more, right? We are giving you introductions to most of the things. The last slide for today. Why should you study database? Even with some limited knowledge of the database, you could be involved in developing a database. Uh, and you don't need to know how to build a database. You need to know what data you want in the database, or who should access the database, or what type of reports you want in the database. And you will work with the IT professional who will design a database for you. But you need some knowledge of the database, and you need to have a good knowledge of what data you want, what reports you want, who you want the report to go to, who you want the data to be given access to, right? Who you want the access to go to. So all of this you have to decide, and you will work with IT professionals if you're not into languages and so forth. And most accountants are not there. It's not part of the job description of accountants to learn the languages, but the accountants must be involved in developing the databases. And the databases also should have some controls to protect the data, right? And you remember we discussed the internal controls. There, how many things does the internal control ensure? Can you remind us? Anybody remind us how many uh, elements does the internal control ensure? 3. Very good. What is the first one? The first one is true and fair financial statements, right? Tip Pro TNF, it could be true and false, right? So true and fair financial statements. The second one, sharat, is effective and efficient operations, right? And the third one is compliance with regulations. Abiding by the law is the same thing, right? Compliance with regulations, right? Compliance with regulations. So the internal controls in relation to the databases, which one of these three do you think it is? The internal controls that ensure the safeguarding of the data and the access of the data, which one of these three do you think it relates to? Anyone? Ahmed says all of them. The answer is all of them, because the data is used to prepare the financial statement. So you want to make sure that the data is accurately entered and protected, right? It also helps you run the operations, right? Because the data is about financial information as well as the operation. And the data is sensitive, and you have some regulations about the data. So for example, you have people's bank account number and ID number and other sensitive information which are confidential. You cannot share it with anybody. So you have to also protect the data so that it is not compromised, right? So the internal controls relating to the database actually cover all of the three aspects of the internal control: the financial statements, the operations, as well as the regulations, right? Very good. So this is the end of chapter 4. Any questions on chapter 4? Okay, now what we are going to do on Tuesday is I'm going to give you a review for the midterm exam, which is next Wednesday, 23rd of September at 12:30. And I'm going to give you the room number and the format of the exam and more details on Tuesday. And I'm going to also practice with you some flowchart exercises on Tuesday. And we will have the quiz on chapters 3 and 4 after the lecture on Tuesday. Okay? So if you have any questions on chapters 3 and 4, you'll get an opportunity to ask before the quiz when we do the review, not just chapters 3 and 4, chapters 1, 2, 3, and 4. And I'm going to go and review the chapters with you on Tuesday. Next week on Sunday and Tuesday, we're going to start chapter 5, but I'm not going to take the entire class period. I will leave some time at the end for you to ask me questions about chapters 1, 2, 3, and 4, because you're going to study over the weekend for the exam, inshallah. And when you come on Sunday and also on Tuesday, you can ask me questions on chapters 1, 2, 3, and 4 before the exam. Is that clear? Are you following? Okay. So the quiz is day after tomorrow on 3 and 4. Okay. Now, may I ask you first question. Have you started to work on the computerized AIS? Okay. Do you find it self-explanatory? Do you find it easy? Do you have any questions for me? Is it easy to understand, easy to follow, or do you have difficulty? Do you need me to help you with something? The practice is difficult? Muhammad Al Isa says. What is difficult? Tell me. I will try to help you. Those who have not started to work on the computerized AIS, you need to start on it, and then if you have any difficulty, I'm going to help you during the class period, right? Um, Atif says, could we also try the sales and the purchase menu? We are not going to go and try new other than what is outside uh, the instructions. If we were in class, we could do more, but we have a large number of students, and I know some of you are more advanced than others, and we have to bring everybody along. Muhammad says we need more practice. No problem, I can give you more practice. Do the two that we have now, right? Uh, Another question from Muhammad, do we need to submit the report? You don't need to submit the reports for the practice, but the exam, when you do the exam, the final one, you need to submit, and the instructions are given there for you to follow, right? So nothing, no need to submit anything else before the exam. But if you have any questions or difficult, right? And also, Muhammad Al Isa, you can enter uh, the same practices more than once on different dates and generate the reports, right? As for the flowcharts, how many of you have done the exercises that I have posted already in flowcharts? Muhammad Ali Isa says he did. How about others? Muhammad has a question here. 4th of October is the computerized AIS. Yes. Right. Okay. Now, if you haven't done the flowchart exercises, then I need you to do them before Tuesday. And then if you have any difficulty with them, I will help them, and I will give you more exercises on flowcharts on Tuesday. So we will draw together. I'm going to give you a question and then give you some time to draw, and then I'm going to show you the solution and why the solution is the solution, etc. Right? So I'll give you more practice on Tuesday, inshallah. And I will make that available also for you in Blackboard. So if there's a question, it says, for each given department of business, do we have to draw the terminal icon for each department or write it on columns? So typically, when you have different departments sending documents, the terminal is drawn at the beginning before the document is sent. So the terminal identifies the source of the document. So the business department or branch or any place where the document is coming from, the terminal has to be drawn. Okay? Does that answer your question, Atif? And each department should be in separate columns as well. Okay, good. Other questions? Questions? You understand what I'm asking you to do, right? I'm asking you to start on the computerized AIS and not wait, and then start preparing for the exam, especially the flow charts. You have 10 days, and that's enough time, inshallah. If you haven't started yet, there is enough time for you to work on, inshallah. So if you put in, let's say, 7 to 10 hours of effort between now and the exam, you should be ready, inshallah. Atif has a question on the transmission tape. The transmission tape is a piece of paper that is attached to a document. And if you have verified the calculation, for example, you have a bank statement and you verified the deposits on that bank statement, and you're manually calculating the totals, and you're attaching a copy of the printout of those totals with the bank statement to the next stage, then you will attach the bank statement, which is the document, and the transmission tape, and you send it to the next department or next office, right? Does that answer your question? So Omar says, do we have to draw flowcharts in the quiz. No, the quiz is multiple choice questions, 5 multiple choice questions, just like the first quiz, half mark each. So there is no drawing involved in the quiz. The drawing is going to come in the midterm exam. Okay. Other questions? You're welcome, Omar. Any other questions? Anything else I could help you with? Okay. So don't uh, spend your time in useless activities. Use your time, because time is limited and all the midterms are coming. So utilize your time. If you don't have any questions, go and get started on the flowchart exercises or the computerized AIS. And inshallah, I will see you on Tuesday. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.